From the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Research Report, Tobacco, Nicotine, and E-Cigarettes, Research Report, Introduction. In 2014, the nation marked the 50th anniversary of the first Surgeon General's report on smoking and health. In 1964, more than 40% of the adult population smoked. Once the link between smoking and its medical consequences, including cancers, heart and lung diseases, became a part of the public consciousness, education efforts and public policy changes were enacted to reduce the number of people who smoke. These efforts resulted in substantial declines in smoking rates in the United States to half the 1964 level. Footnote 1. However, rates of cigarette smoking and other tobacco use are still too high. Footnote 2. And some populations are disproportionately affected by tobacco's health consequences. Most notably, people with mental disorders, including substance abuse disorders, smoke at higher rates than the general population. Footnotes 3 through 6. Additionally, people living below the poverty line and those with low educational attainment are more likely to smoke than those in the general population. As tobacco use is the leading preventable cause of mortality in the United States, footnote 1, differential rates of smoking and use of other tobacco products is a significant contributor to health disparities among some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Next section. What is the scope of tobacco, nicotine, and e-cigarette use in the United States? All data refer to the United States population. How many people use tobacco products or vaping devices? Among people aged 12 or older in 2021, 22.0%, or about 61.6 million people, reported using tobacco products or vaping nicotine in the past 30 days. 2021 DT 2.1. 15.6%, or about 43.6 million people, reported smoking cigarettes in the past 30 days. 2021 DT 2.1. 4.7%, or about 13.2 million people, reported vaping nicotine in the past 30 days. 2021 DT 2.1. Source: 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. How many young students use tobacco products or vaping devices? Among young people in 2022, an estimated 8.7% of 8th graders and 15.1% of 10th graders and 24.8% of 12th graders reported any nicotine use in the past 30 days. An estimated 0.8% of 8th graders, 1.7% of 10th graders, and 4% of 12th graders reported any cigarette use in the past 30 days. An estimated 7.1% of 8th graders, 14.2% of 10th graders, and 20.7% of 12th graders reported vaping nicotine in the past 30 days. Source: 2022 Monitoring the Future Survey. How many people have a nicotine dependence? Among people aged 12 or older in 2020, 8.5%, or about 23.6 million people, had nicotine dependence in the past 30 days. Source: 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Next section. How does the tobacco deliver its effects? The smoke from combustible tobacco products contains more than 7,000 chemicals. Nicotine is the primary reinforcing component of tobacco. It drives tobacco addiction. Footnote 20 and footnote 21. Hundreds of compounds are added to tobacco to enhance its flavor and the absorption of nicotine. Footnote 22. Cigarette smoking is the most popular method of using tobacco. However, many people also use smokeless tobacco products, such as snuff and chewing tobacco, which also contain nicotine. See, quote, other tobacco products, end quote. E-cigarettes, which deliver nicotine in the absence of other chemicals in tobacco, have become popular in recent years. See, quote, what are electronic cigarettes, end quote. The cigarette is a very efficient and highly engineered drug delivery system. By inhaling tobacco smoke, the average smoker takes in 1 to 2 milligrams of nicotine per cigarette. When tobacco is smoked, nicotine rapidly reaches peak levels in the bloodstream and enters the brain. A typical smoker will take 10 puffs on a cigarette over the roughly 5 minutes that the cigarette is lit. Footnote 23. Thus, a person who smokes about 1 pack, 20 cigarettes daily, gets 200, quote, hits, end quote, of nicotine to the brain each day. Among those who do not inhale the smoke, such as cigar and pipe smokers and smokeless tobacco users, nicotine is absorbed through mucous membranes in the mouth and reaches peak blood and brain levels more slowly. Immediately after exposure to nicotine, there is a, quote, kick, end quote, caused in part by the drug's stimulation of the adrenal glands and resulting discharge of epinephrine, adrenaline. The rush of adrenaline stimulates the body and causes an increase in blood pressure, respiration, and heart rate. Footnote 24. Like other drugs, nicotine also activates reward pathways in the brain, circuitry that regulates reinforcement and feelings of pleasure. Footnote 20 and footnote 21. Next section. Is nicotine addictive? Yes. Most smokers use tobacco regularly because they are addicted to nicotine. Addiction is characterized by the compulsive drug seeking and use, even in the face of negative health consequences. The majority of smokers would like to stop smoking. Each year, about half try to quit permanently. Yet only about 6% of smokers are able to quit in a given year. Footnote 25. Most smokers will need to make multiple attempts before they are able to quit permanently. Footnote 22. Medications including varenicline, and some antidepressants, example, bupropion. And nicotine replacement therapy can help in many cases. See, quote, what are treatments for tobacco dependency, end quote. Footnote 26. A transient surge of endorphins in the reward circuits of the brain causes a slight, brief euphoria when nicotine is administered. This surge is a much briefer than the, quote, high, end quote, associated with other drugs. However, like other drugs of abuse, nicotine increases levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine in these reward circuits. Footnote 20, footnote 21, footnote 27, which reinforces the behavior of taking the drug. Repeated exposure alters these circuits' sensitivity to dopamine and leads to changes in other brain circuits involved in learning, stress, and self-control. For many tobacco users, the long-term brain changes induced by continued nicotine exposure result in addiction, which involves withdrawal symptoms when not smoking, and difficulty adhering to the resolution to quit. Footnote 28, footnote 29. The pharmacokinetic properties of nicotine, or the way it is processed by the body, contribute to its addictiveness. Footnote 24. When cigarette smoke enters the lungs, nicotine is absorbed rapidly in the blood and delivered quickly to the brain, so that nicotine levels peak within 10 seconds of inhalation. But the acute effects of nicotine also dissipate quickly, along with the associated feelings of reward. This rapid cycle causes the smoker to continue dosing to maintain the drug's pleasurable effects and prevent withdrawal symptoms. Footnote 30. Withdrawal occurs as a result of dependence when the body becomes used to having the drug in the system. Being without nicotine for too long can cause a regular user to experience irritability, craving, depression, anxiety, cognitive and attention deficits, sleep disturbances, and increased appetite. These withdrawal symptoms may begin within a few hours after the last cigarette, quickly driving people back to tobacco use. When a person quits smoking, withdrawal symptoms peak within the first few days of the last cigarette smoked and usually subside within a few weeks. Footnote 31. For some people, however, symptoms may persist for months, and the severity of withdrawal symptoms appear to be influenced by a person's genes. Footnote 30, footnote 31. In addition to its pleasurable effects, nicotine also temporarily boosts aspects of cognition, such as the ability to sustain attention and hold information in memory. However, long-term smoking is associated with cognitive decline and risk of Alzheimer's disease, suggesting that short-term nicotine-related enhancement does not outweigh long-term consequences for cognitive functioning. Footnote 32. In addition, people in withdrawal from nicotine experience neurocognitive deficits, such as problems with attention or memory. Footnote 33. These neurocognitive withdrawal symptoms are increasingly recognized as a contributor to continued smoking. Footnote 34. A small research study also suggested that withdrawal may impair sleep for severely dependent smokers, and that this may additionally contribute to relapse. Footnote 35. In addition to the drug's impact on multiple neurotransmitters and their receptors, footnote 30, many behavioral factors can affect the severity of withdrawal symptoms. For many people who smoke, the feel, smell, and sight of a cigarette and the ritual of obtaining, handling, lighting, and smoking the cigarette are all associated with the pleasurable effects of smoking and can make withdrawal or craving worse. Footnote 36. Learning processes in the brain associate these cues with nicotine-induced dopamine surges in the reward system. Footnote 21. Similar to what occurs with other drug addictions, nicotine replacement therapies such as gum, patches, and inhalers, and other medications approved for the treatment of nicotine addiction may help alleviate the physiological aspect of withdrawal. Footnote 37 through footnote 39. See, quote, "What are treatments for tobacco dependence?" End quote. However, cravings often persist because of the power of these cues. Behavioral therapies can help smokers identify environmental triggers of craving so they can use strategies to avoid these triggers and manage the feelings that arise when triggers cannot be. Footnote 40 and footnote 41. Are there other chemicals that may contribute to tobacco addiction? Research is showing that nicotine may not be the only ingredient in tobacco that affects its addictive potential. Smoking is linked with a marked decrease in the levels of monoamine oxidase, MAO, an important enzyme that is responsible for the breakdown of dopamine, as well as a reduction in MAO binding sites in the brain. Footnote 42. This change is likely caused by some as yet unidentified ingredient in tobacco smoke other than nicotine. Because we know that nicotine itself does not dramatically alter MAO levels. Animal research suggests that MAO inhibition makes nicotine more reinforcing, but more studies are needed to determine whether MAO inhibition affects human tobacco dependence. Footnote 42. Animal research has also shown that acetaldehyde, another chemical in tobacco smoke created by the burning of sugars, added sweeteners, dramatically increases the reinforcing properties of nicotine and may also contribute to tobacco addiction. Next section. What are the physical health consequences of tobacco use? Cigarette smoking harms nearly every organ in the body. Footnote 1, footnote 44. And smoking is the leading preventable cause of premature death in the United States. Although rates of smoking have declined, it is estimated that it leads to about 480,000 deaths yearly. Footnote 1. Smokers aged 60 and older have a twofold increase in mortality compared with those who have never smoked, dying an estimated 6 years earlier. Footnote 45. Quitting smoking results in immediate health benefits, and some or all of the reduced life expectancy can be recovered depending on the age a person quits. Footnote 46. Although nicotine itself does not cause cancer, at least 69 chemicals in tobacco smoke are carcinogenic. Footnote 1. And cigarette smoking accounts for at least 30% of all cancer deaths. Footnote 22. The overall rates of death from cancer are twice as high among smokers as non-smokers, with heavy smokers having a 4 times greater risk of death from cancer than non-smokers. Footnote 1. Foremost among the cancers caused by tobacco use is lung cancer. Cigarette smoking has been linked to about 80 to 90% of all cases of lung cancer, the leading cause of cancer death for both men and women, and it is responsible for roughly 80% of deaths from this disease. Footnote 22, footnote 47. Smoking increases lung cancer risk 5 to 10-fold, with greater risk among heavy smokers. Footnote 48. Smoking is also associated with cancers of the mouth, pharynx, larynx, esophagus, stomach, pancreas, cervix, kidney, and bladder, as well as acute myeloid. Footnote 1. Cigarette smoking is not the only form of tobacco use associated with cancers. Smokeless tobacco, see, quote, other tobacco products, end quote, has been linked to cancer of the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, and lung, as well as to colorectal cancer. Footnote 49. In addition to cancer, smoking causes lung diseases such as chronic bronchitis and emphysema. And it has been found to exacerbate asthma symptoms in adults and children. Cigarette smoking is the most significant risk factor for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. Footnote 50. Survival statistics indicate that quitting smoking results in repair to much of the smoking-induced lung damage over time. However, once COPD develops, it is irreversible. COPD-related lung damage is not repaired with time. Smoking also substantially increases the risk of heart disease, including stroke, heart attack, vascular disease, and aneurysm. Footnote 51 and footnote 52. Cardiovascular disease is responsible for 40% of all smoking-related deaths. Footnote 53. Smoking causes coronary heart disease, the leading cause of death in the United States. Smoking is also linked to many other major health conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis, inflammation, and impaired immune function. Footnote 1. Even young smokers aged 26 to 41 report reduced health-related quality of life compared with non-smoking peers, according to a cross-sectional population study. Footnote 54. Recent animal research also identified a pathway between the pancreas and a part of the brain active in nicotine intake, potentially linking cigarette smoking to the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Next section. What are the effects of second-hand and third-hand tobacco smoke? Second-hand smoke is a significant public health concern and driver of smoke-free policies. Also called passive or secondary smoke, second-hand smoke increases the risk for many diseases. Footnote 55. Exposure to environmental tobacco smoke among non-smokers increases lung cancer risk by about 20%. Footnote 48. Second-hand smoke is estimated to cause approximately 53,800 deaths annually in the United States. Footnote 55. Exposure to tobacco smoke in the home is also a risk factor for asthma in children. Footnote 56. Smoking also leaves chemical residue on surfaces where smoking has occurred, which can persist long after the smoke itself has been cleared from the environment. This phenomenon, known as, quote, third-hand smoke, end quote, is increasingly recognized as a potential danger, especially to children, who not only inhale fumes released by these residues, but also ingest residues that get on their hands after crawling on floors or touching walls and furniture. Footnote 57. Next section. What are the risks of smoking during pregnancy? Smoking during pregnancy is linked with a range of poor birth outcomes, including low birth weight and preterm birth. Footnote 58 and footnote 59. Restricted head growth, footnote 60. Placental problems, footnote 61. Increased risk of stillbirth, footnote 62. Increased risk of miscarriage, footnote 62 and footnote 63. Health and developmental consequences among children have also been linked to prenatal smoke exposure, including poor lung function, persistent wheezing, and asthma, possibly through DNA methylation, footnote 64. Visual difficulties such as strabismus, refractive errors, and retinopathy, footnote 65. Unfortunately, smoking by pregnant women is common. In 2014, 8.4% of women smoked at any time during pregnancy, with those aged 20 to 24, who were American Indian or Alaska Natives, having higher rates, at 13% and 18% respectively. Footnote 66. 1/5 of women who smoked during the first 6 months of pregnancy quit by their third trimester. Overall, cessation rates were highest for those with the highest educational attainment and private insurance. Footnote 66. Therefore, there is a clear need to expand smoking cessation treatment to younger women and those of lower socioeconomic status. See box, quote, smoking cessation for pregnant women, end quote. Next section. How many adolescents use tobacco? Most people who use tobacco started during adolescence, and those who begin at a younger age are more likely to develop nicotine dependence and have trouble quitting. Footnote 67. According to the 2022 Monitoring the Future survey, 4% of 12th graders, 1.7% of 10th graders, and 0.8% of 8th graders used cigarettes in the past month. Footnote 12. An analysis of the 2022 National Youth Tobacco Survey, NYTS, found that 11.3% of middle and high school students reported using a tobacco product in the last 30 days, with higher rates among young people experiencing high levels of psychological distress. Young people whose guardians earned lower wages and young people from marginalized communities reported higher smoking rates. Footnote 68. Other research has found that light and intermittent smoking among adolescents is associated with the same level of difficulty quitting as daily smoking. Footnote 69. Any exposure to nicotine among youth is a concern. The adolescent brain is still developing, and nicotine has effects on the brain's reward system and brain regions involved in emotional and cognitive functions. Footnote 70. Research suggests that the nicotine-related changes to these areas of the brain during adolescence may perpetuate continued tobacco use into adulthood. Footnote 71. These changes also contribute to a higher rate of other substance use disorders among people who use tobacco during adolescence, sometimes referred to as a quote gateway end quote effect. Footnote 70, footnote 72. Here there's an image. On the far left, e-pipe. Next to it on the right, e-cigar. Next to it on the right, large size tank devices. Next to them on the right, medium-sized tank device. Next to it on the right, rechargeable e-cigarette, and then finally on the far right-hand side, disposable e-cigarette. Photo by Mandy Mills, CDC. Resuming the reading. Mental health, beliefs about smoking, perception of schoolmates smoking, and other substance use are additional factors that can influence an adolescent's risk for smoking and nicotine dependence. Footnote 73. Emotional problems, including depression, footnote 74, and recent negative life events, footnote 75, are associated with tobacco use among adolescents. Smoking among peers and within social groups is a major environmental factor that influences adolescent smoking. Social smoking is a more important motivator for adolescents compared to adult smokers. Footnote 76. It is common for adolescent smoking to follow an intergenerational pattern which has genetic, epigenetic, and environmental influences. Footnote 73 and footnote 77. Data from parents and adolescents suggest that current parental nicotine dependence is strongly linked with adolescent smoking and dependence. Other factors, such as parents' education, marital status, and parenting behavior, also influence teen smoking. Next section. What are electronic cigarettes? E-cigarettes, electronic nicotine delivery systems, emerged in the U.S. market in 2007 and have rapidly grown in popularity. Footnote 78. E-cigarettes, or e-vaporizers, are devices that heat a liquid containing solvents, flavors, and often nicotine. Footnote 79. Users inhale the resulting vapor. A variety of designs are available, some mimicking the look of traditional cigarettes. More than 7,000 flavors are available for e-cigarettes. Footnote 80. Some of which are especially appealing to youth. Many convenience stores, drug stores, grocery stores, and other physical and online retail outlets sell e-cigarettes, although as of mid-December 2019, it is illegal to sell any nicotine or tobacco products to people under 21. Footnote 237. Some convenience stores and drugstore chains have also stopped selling e-cigarettes to promote public health. In 2013, more than one-third of cigarette smokers said they had ever used e-cigarettes. Footnote 78. According to data from the 2014 Tobacco Products and Risk Perceptions Survey, current cigarette smokers had a greater likelihood of using e-cigarettes. This analysis found that half of cigarette smokers had ever used an e-cigarette, and 20.7% currently used these devices. However, approximately 10% of adults who used e-cigarettes had never smoked previously. Footnote 81. Data from the 2014 National Health Interview Survey indicated that 0.4% of adults who had never smoked and 0.8% of former smokers, abstinent for or more years, currently use e-cigarettes. Footnote 82. The survey also found that 13% of daily e-cigarette users were former smokers who quit during the past year. Footnote 82. As with cigarette use, e-cigarette use is higher among people with mental health conditions, with 3.1% currently using compared with 1.1% of those without mental illness. Footnote 83. It is also a concern that pregnant women are using e-cigarettes as nicotine exposure during periods of developmental vulnerability, including prenatal development, has adverse health consequences. Footnote 84. Users report the belief that e-cigarette producers are less harmful than traditional cigarettes. Footnote 85. And many report using them to help quit traditional cigarettes. Help quit smoking traditional cigarettes. While it is not yet clear if e-cigarettes are effective smoking cessation aids, the devices are sometimes marketed for this purpose. Footnote 86. See, quote, "Are e-cigarettes useful for smoking cessation?" End quote. Some researchers suggest that older adults use these devices as a tobacco substitute, although not always as a cessation method. Footnote 87. Users also cite convenience and being conscientious toward others as reasons for using these products. Footnote 88. Reports of deaths related to vaping. The Food and Drug Administration has alerted the public to thousands of reports of serious lung illnesses associated with vaping, including dozens of deaths. They are working with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, to investigate the cause of these illnesses. Many of the suspect products tested by the states or federal health officials have been identified as vaping products containing THC, the main psychotropic ingredient in marijuana. Some of the patients reported a mixture of THC and nicotine, and some reported vaping nicotine alone. While the CDC and FDA continue to investigate possible other contributing substances, CDC has identified a thickening agent, vitamin E acetate, as a chemical of concern among people with e-cigarette or vaping-associated lung injuries. They recommend that people should not use any product containing vitamin E acetate or any vaping products containing THC, particularly from informal sources like friends, family, or in-person and online dealers. They also warn against modifying any products purchased in stores or using any vape products bought on the street. People, including health professionals, should report any adverse effects of vaping products. The CDC has posted an information page for consumers. How does the federal government regulate e-cigarettes? The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, which regulates cigarettes, tobacco, and smokeless tobacco, gained the authority in 2016 to also regulate electronic nicotine delivery systems, such as e-cigarettes and vape pens. All cigars, hookah, water pipe tobacco, and nicotine gels, among other tobacco products. Under the new regulations, e-cigarette manufacturers must list ingredients. In December 2019, the federal government raised the legal minimum age of sale of tobacco products from 18 to 21 years. And in January 2020, the FDA issued a policy on the sale of flavored vaping cartridges. Is it true that e-cigarettes are safer than traditional cigarettes? It is likely that, on balance, e-cigarettes are safer than traditional cigarettes from the standpoint of physical health. However, as discussed above, the nicotine in e-cigarettes can cause addiction and neurocognitive impairments. Although for regulatory purposes, e-cigarettes are classified as, quote, tobacco products, end quote, they do not contain tobacco or produce the same toxic combustion products, like tar, that cause lung cancer and other diseases in users and people exposed to secondhand smoke. However, the vapor from e-cigarettes typically contains nicotine and a range of other chemicals. Footnote 89. Because these products are relatively new, evidence on the short-term effects of exposure to e-cigarettes, aerosols, is limited, and very little is known about the long-term health effects. A review of recent literature found that some of the chemicals in e-cigarette liquid, propylene glycol and glycerol, cause throat irritation and coughing. Footnote 89. Other research suggests that vapor exposure may be linked with impaired lung function. Footnote 89. Chemical analysis that compare the profiles of electronic and traditional cigarettes have suggested that e-cigarettes have a reduced carcinogenic profile and impart a lower potential for disease. Footnote 90. However, toxicant, carcinogens, and metal particles have been detected in the liquids and aerosols of e-cigarettes, and it is currently unclear what risk they pose with repeated use. Footnote 91. As with traditional cigarettes, use of e-cigarettes involuntarily exposes non-users to second-hand and third-hand aerosol. Footnote 91. The research on second-hand exposure to the aerosol from e-cigarettes is limited, but one study found that fine particulate matter concentrations during an indoor event in a large room with e-cigarette smokers were higher than those reported previously in venues that allowed cigarette smoking. Footnote 88. An in vitro study showed that exposing lung tissues and cells to e-cigarette liquid induced increased inflammatory responses and oxidative stress markers. Footnote 92. Another study that analyzed e-cigarette flavorings found that 39 of the 51 flavors tested positive for diacetyl, a chemical associated with irreversible obstructive lung disease called bronchiolitis obliterans. Other chemicals
pentanedione. Pentanedione.
Just read it one more time, because I can't pronounce that.
2,3 pentanedione.
Pentanedione. And acetone. Or
Acetoin.
acetylene, associated with severe respiratory diseases among exposed people, were also found in many e-cigarette flavorings. Footnote 89. The amount of nicotine in e-cigarette fluid varies. Some research has found that e-cigarettes deliver less nicotine on average than traditional cigarettes. Footnote 93. But that users may change puffing patterns to compensate. Inexperienced e-cigarette users take in modest nicotine concentrations, but those who regularly use these devices adjust their puffing to consume similar levels of the drug as with traditional cigarettes. Footnote 93 through footnote 95. Newer e-cigarette devices can deliver substantial amounts of nicotine, and some users are able to get nicotine at levels similar to footnote 96, or even greater than a traditional cigarette. Footnote 97, footnote 98. One study found equivalent levels of nicotine's major metabolite in the blood of smokers who use traditional and e-cigarettes. Footnote 90. Thus, all the nicotine-related concerns of traditional cigarettes, addiction, effects on cognitive function, and effects on prenatal development apply to e-cigarettes as well. Risks of e-cigarettes to children. Young children may accidentally ingest the concentrated nicotine, which often contains flavors, in e-cigarette liquid. Footnote 91. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently compared calls to poison centers in the United States related to human exposures to e-cigarettes and traditional cigarettes. The study found that between September 2010 and February 2014, the proportion of e-cigarette calls among all cigarette-related calls increased from 0.3% to 41.7%. Footnote 99. Most of the e-cigarette exposures were among children under the age of 5 years, 51.1%, and people over the age of 20, 42.0%, whereas almost all traditional cigarette exposure calls involved young children. Footnote 99. Data indicated that a greater proportion of e-cigarette exposure calls, 57.8%, resulted in adverse health effects than traditional cigarette exposure, 36.0%. These adverse health effects include vomiting, nausea, and eye irritation. Footnote 99. Are e-cigarettes useful for smoking cessation? Some research suggests e-cigarettes may help people quit smoking cigarettes, while other data suggests that they can impede quitting and that they may open the door to traditional cigarette use for people who might not otherwise try them. Thus, much more research is needed on this question. One review of recent studies suggested that the likelihood of quitting cigarettes was 28% lower among individuals who used e-cigarettes compared with those who did not use these devices. Regardless of whether users were interested in quitting, footnote 100. Research from the United Kingdom suggests that among smokers who consume to use traditional cigarettes, daily use of e-cigarettes was associated with increased attempts to quit and cut back, but not with success. Footnote 101. However, another analysis estimated that, in England, 16,000 smokers were able to quit in 2014, who would not have quit if e-cigarettes had not been available. Footnote 102. A review and meta-analysis also suggested that using e-cigarettes for a minimum of 6 months was associated with quitting or reducing the number of cigarettes used. Footnote 103. E-cigarettes and teens. National survey data suggests that e-cigarettes were the most commonly used nicotine delivery product among youth. Footnote 12 through footnote 17. A review of the literature found that up to 20% of adolescents who currently use e-cigarettes have never smoked a traditional cigarette. Footnote 87. A major concern is that e-cigarettes' flavors, design, and marketing particularly appeal to youth. Footnote 91. And that by introducing young people to nicotine and glamorizing a smoking-like behavior, e-cigarettes could open the door to cigarette use in a population that is particularly vulnerable to addiction and that has seen historic declines in cigarette smoking. Some research indicates that e-cigarette use may lead to the use of traditional cigarettes among adolescents and young adults. Footnote 104. According to data from the 2012 NYTS, youth who had only used e-cigarettes reported an increased intention to smoke traditional cigarettes compared with peers who had never used these devices. The survey found no link between e-cigarette use and intention to quit smoking among youth who were current smokers, indicating that this age group does not see these products primarily as smoking cessation aids. Footnote 105. A longitudinal cohort study of 16 to 26-year-olds who had never smoked traditional cigarettes found that 2.3%, 16 participants, used e-cigarettes at the start of the study. After a one-year follow-up, approximately 69%, 11 of 16, of these participants progressed to smoking traditional cigarettes, compared to 18.9%, 128 of 678, among those who never used an e-cigarette. Footnote 106. Another study found that past month e-cigarette use predicted future cigarette use, but that past month cigarette use did not predict future e-cigarette use. Footnote 107. Many young people report experimenting with e-cigarettes out of curiosity, because the flavors appeal to them, or because of peer influences. Footnote 108. The majority of youth who report e-cigarette use in one study had friends who used these products. Almost half of adolescents who used e-cigarettes said that they did not believe these products were associated with health risks. Footnote 109. Young people also perceived e-cigarettes as easy to obtain, quote, cool, end quote, and a better alternative to cigarettes because they were thought to be healthier and could be used anywhere. Among youth who stopped using e-cigarettes, the major underlying reasons were health concerns, loss of interest, high cost, bad taste, and a view of e-cigarettes as less satisfying than cigarettes. Footnote 108. And this section is dated for January 2020. I'm going to pause the reading briefly and just state the date for some of these other sections. Section, how many adolescents use tobacco? It's dated for January 2020. Section before that, What are the risks of smoking during pregnancy? It is dated July 2011. The section before that, what are the effects of second-hand and third-hand tobacco smoke? It is dated February 2026. The section before that, what are the physical health consequences of tobacco use? It is dated for January 2020. The section before that, is nicotine addictive? It is dated January 2020. The section before that, how does tobacco deliver its effects? It is dated January 2020. The section before that, what is the scope of tobacco, nicotine, and e-cigarette use in the United States? Is dated January 2020. And finally, the introduction section is dated also for January 2020. So, moving on to the next section, other tobacco products. While cigarette smoking has declined significantly during the past 40 years, use of other tobacco products is increasing, particularly among young people. Footnote 110. These include cigars, tobacco wrapped in leaf tobacco or another tobacco-containing substance, instead of paper, which can be bought individually. Cigarrillos, or cigarrillos, small cigars that cost less and are also available for purchase individually. Hookahs, or water pipes, pipes with a long, flexible tube for drawing smoke from lit, flavored tobacco through water contained in a bowl. Smokeless tobacco, tobacco like chewing tobacco, products like chewing tobacco and snuff that are placed in the mouth between the teeth and gums. Powder tobacco, mixtures that are inhaled through the nose. In 2014, almost 1/4 of high school students reported past month use of a tobacco product, with e-cigarettes 13.4%, hookahs 9.4%, cigarettes 9.2%, cigars 8.2%, smokeless tobacco 5.5%, and snus, spelled S-N-U-S, moist powder tobacco 1.9%, as the most popular. Footnote 17. Cigars. In 2016, an estimated 12 million people aged 12 or older, 4.6% of the adolescent and adult population, smoked cigarettes during the past month. Footnote 7. The majority of adolescents and young adults who smoked cigars also smoke cigarettes. Footnote 111. Cigarrillos.
Cigarillos.
Anyways, data from the tobacco use supplement. Data from the tobacco use supplement to the current population survey and NSDUH suggests that younger and less economically advantaged males initiate tobacco use with cigar. One moment.
Cigarillo.
cigarillo. I'll go with that for now. From 2002 to 2011, past month cigarette smoking declined for males and females of all age groups. However, during this same period, rates of cigarillo use among males aged 18 to 25 remained constant at approximately 9%. Footnote 111. Hookahs or water pipes. Between 2011 and 2014, use of hookah increased among middle and high school students despite decreased use of cigarettes and cigars, according to the NYTS. Footnote 17. Research also suggests that rates of hookah use for tobacco smoking increased during the first month of college. Footnote 102. Nationally representative data from college students indicate that daily cigarette or cigar smokers, as well as marijuana users, were more likely to be frequent water pipe users. Footnote 113. Hookah users may mistakenly believe that it is less addictive or dangerous than cigarettes. However, one session of hookah smoking exposed users to greater smoke volumes and higher levels of tobacco toxicants, example tar, than a single cigarette. Footnote 114. Additionally, hookah smoking is linked with nicotine dependence and its associated medical consequences. Footnote 115, footnote 116. See, quote, what are the physical health consequences of tobacco use, end quote. Reviews of the literature on water pipe users suggest that, like those who use other forms of tobacco, many have tried to quit but have been unsuccessful on their own. Footnote 115. These findings indicate the need for tobacco control policies and prevention and treatment interventions for this form of nicotine development that are similar to those seen for cigarettes. Smokeless tobacco. In 2016, 8.8 million people aged 12 or older, 3.3% of this population, used smokeless tobacco during the past month. Footnote 7. Overall, use of smokeless tobacco among adults decreased from 1992 to 2003, but has held constant since. Footnote 117. Longitudinal data suggests that people are more likely to switch from smokeless tobacco use to cigarette smoking than vice versa. Footnote 118. Although smokers may attempt to use smokeless products to cut down or quit, research suggests that this approach is not effective. Footnote 116. However, some argue that using smokeless tobacco in lieu of cigarettes may help reduce the harms associated with smoking traditional cigarettes. Footnote 119. Poly-tobacco use. Some users of tobacco consume it in multiple forms. Poly-tobacco use. This behavior is associated with greater nicotine dependence. Footnote 120. And the risk for other substance use disorder. Footnote 172. Analyses of a decade of data from NSDUH found steady rates of poly-tobacco use from 2002 to 2011, 8.7% to 7.4% among people age 12 and older. However, use of some product combinations, such as cigarettes and smokeless tobacco, cigars and smokeless tobacco, and use of more than two products increased over that period. Footnote 120. Among individuals younger than 26, rates of poly-tobacco use increased despite declines in overall tobacco use. Poly-tobacco use was associated with being male, having relatively low income and education, and engaging in risk-taking behaviors. Footnote 120. In 2014, an estimated 2.2 million middle and high school students had used two or more types of tobacco products during the past month, according to NYTS. Footnote 121. Poly-tobacco use was common even among students who used tobacco products 5 days or fewer during the past month. Footnote 121. The 2012 NYTS had found that 4.3% of students used 3 or more types of tobacco. This study also observed that male gender use of flavored products, nicotine dependence, receptivity to tobacco marketing, and perceived peer use were all associated with youth poly-tobacco use. Footnote 122. Flavored tobacco use among adolescents and young adults. One specific concern about e-cigarettes and tobacco products like cigarillos and hookahs is the addition of flavorings, which may make them particularly appealing to youth. Footnote 17, footnote 111. The Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009 banned the sale of cigarettes with flavors other than methanol, but other flavored tobacco products, example, small cigars, cigarillos, and smokeless tobacco, can still be sold. Adding flavors to tobacco products or to the nicotine solution of cigarettes can make them more appealing to some users because they can mask the harsh taste. Footnote 108, footnote 123. Although more research is needed on how flavors affect long-term use, health experts have expressed concerns that many of the flavorings used in tobacco products are also found in candles and beverages. Footnote 124. Such flavors may make them more appealing to youth and may contribute to increased use of these products among young people. Approximately 6.3% of middle and high school students reported using either flavored cigarettes or small cigars, according to the 2011 NYTS. Footnote 125. Data from the 2014 NYTS indicate that of middle and high school students who currently use tobacco, about 70%, an estimated 3.26 million youths, had used at least one flavored tobacco product during the past month. Footnote 126. Among past month users, the most commonly used flavored products were e-cigarettes, hookah tobacco, and cigars. Footnote 126. It seems that youth may not necessarily, quote, grow out of, end quote, using flavored tobacco products. Among young adults aged 18 to 34, nearly one-fifth, 18.5%, of those who use tobacco consumed flavored, including methanol products. Footnote 127. This section is dated January 2020. Next section. Are there sex differences in smoking tobacco? And I will stop here for this recording.